Okay, in this video for AP Statistics, we are going to talk about a sampling distribution for a proportion. So we're going to do this example here. So for the state of Texas, the proportion of young mothers that give birth to underweight babies is approximately 10%. Find the sampling distribution of p hat based on a random sample size of 200. So when we're told to find the sampling distribution, that means we want to determine if the sample size meets the criteria to be a normal distribution, and we want to find the average or center along with the standard deviation for my sample. That is what I'm headed for. So of course, since this is dependent upon my sample size meeting all of my conditions or criteria, that's where I'm going to start. So I need to talk about my conditions. Okay, so the first thing is it a random sample? And we're told in the problem that it is in fact a random sample. So 200 young mothers represent a simple random sample of all young mothers in Texas. Okay, and my handwriting is poopy, sorry. Okay, so that's the first condition. The second condition, there's no reason to assume that these young mothers are not independent, so we are just going to conclude that these 200 young mothers are independent. 200 is less than 10% of all young mothers in Texas. Now, this is something that we're kind of just making the assumption, okay? So it actually might be better in this particular situation, since we don't know how many there are. It might actually be better for us to say something like reasonable to assume 200 is less than 10% of all young mothers in Texas. It's all about communicating properly, okay? So I'm just writing down what I'm thinking. It seems reasonable to assume that that's true. So that is why I'm doing it, since I don't have the total number. And then the last thing, we need to know if this is actually a sample that's large enough so that we can use the normal curve, or so that we can approximate normal. So I am going to check it out with my NP rules. Remember, I want at least 10 of one category and 10 of another. So the N here is 200, and the P is given to me at approximately 10%. So 200 times 0.1 is 20, and 200 times 0.1, or 1 minus 0.1, which is 0.9, is going to be 180. Okay, both of those values are bigger than 10, so it is large enough. So I'm going to write sample is large enough to approximate normal. And in doing that, I can then come up with my values up here for my distribution. So the first thing I'm going to do is find mu of p hat. Well, it's going to be equal to p, which in this case I'm told is approximately 10%. And then my standard deviation, of course, I am going to use the square root of the 0.1 times 1 minus that, which is 0.9, over 200. Don't forget that's the square root of that whole thing. And then you should get approximately 0.0212. And then, of course, do not forget to write this out, because this is ultimately our answer. It's just all the other stuff leading up to it enables me to say that. Okay, so in part B, what is the probability that more than 13% of the sample of mothers give birth to underweight babies? Now, this is where we're using the normal curve, or the normal distribution, to give a probability. So this is just drawing a curve, just like we're used to doing, And then more than 13%, that's going to be to the right, and then shading to the right. And I'm going to write an inequality statement, p hat greater than 0.13. It is very important that you adhere to the proper notation here. We want the probability of p hat because we are dealing with proportions here. And then, of course, in order to find my answer, I can use my chart and look up a z-score. Well, you'd have to find your z-score here. If you did that, you'd have to do this, and then you'd get your z-score, and then you'd look that up on your chart and write your answer. Or you can go to Staplet, or you can use your calculator. Either or any of these situations are going to give you this value right here, 0.0785. So the probability that more than 13% of the sample of mothers will give birth to underweight babies, the probability of that happening is about 7.85%. There you go. Okay, so part C, what is the probability that less than 5% of the sample of mothers give birth to underweight babies? So again, I'm just going to draw my graph here. 5%, of course, is below 10%, and this is less than. So the probability that p hat is less than 0.05. And again, I can use Staplet, my calculator, whatever. So the probability that less than 5% of the sample will give birth to underweight babies is actually less than 1%. It's just 0.92%.